Let's take Close Encounters of the Third
Sure.
Kind and Star Wars. Let's say they both came out around the same
They did.
time. Why did one have a longer shelf life and the other one is just this amazing nostalgic film that those of us at that time remember fondly?
It's fascinating to look at that case study because, yeah, you have two films that had similar budgets, both had similar type of filmmakers. They were targeting a very similar audience. They were released at the same time. Like, everything's the same. One becomes a really good movie that people love and actually did pretty well, Close Encounters of the Third Kind. Another becomes a $50 billion brand. And so there's a variable in there somewhere that created that separation in the marketplace. And we can look at that and probably guess pretty closely why that happened. There's a book that I read recently called How Star Wars Conquered the Universe, where they asked Steven Spielberg this exact same question. And because him and Lucas would actually give each other producer points on all of their movies. And so Lucas had producer points on Close Encounters. Spielberg had producer points on Star Wars. Obviously, Spielberg got a better part of that deal. And they said, well, why did it work out so well for Lucas and pretty well for you, but it's not even in the same ballpark? He said there's two reasons. He said from the beginning, Lucas approached this project not as just a single film. He always had a broader vision. He understood that there was a story before this, there's going to be a story after this. Maybe he didn't have all the things planned out exactly and have it all worked out, but his vision was very big from the beginning. And secondly, he said he had a world that people wanted to explore. He had a story world. He said, I never even gave any a thought of my story world. The setting of Close Encounters is our world that's just being invaded by aliens. But what he did, he created a world that people wanted to continue to explore. And if you can create a world and an IP, an intellectual property that people want to continue to explore, then all of a sudden that then makes the room for the other things that you want to do. And so, what's really interesting about Lucas in the same book is that he didn't grow up wanting to be a filmmaker. He grew up wanting to be an architect. And he worked at his dad's toy store every summer as a kid. And so he approached filmmaking not from a filmmaking standpoint. He approached it from a architectural and toy standpoint. And he still went into make a good movie, of course, but he then approached it, the industry and the creative and the writing of it in a completely different way that then fueled all these opportunities. If you look at from the original Star Wars movie, the Cantina Scene, where Luke and Obi-Wan, they go into the cantina and there's all those crazy aliens around, and this is where they find Han Solo for the first time. There was a very specific choice of I want these crazy aliens all around. They could have had, to cut back on budget, they could have had everybody look human like Luke if they wanted to, but instead he really made sure that every single character in that bar and in that cantina had a very distinctive look, that they seemed mysterious, that it was obvious that all of them had some sort of backstory involved. And just that creative, one, the writing decision, two, the directorial decision. If you watch the scene, the way they made sure they got shots of all of them, there were interesting ones in the foreground, in the background. They took time in the edit of the film to cut and show a handful of them. Then those creative opportunities, both in the writing, the directing, and the editing, then fueled short stories and video games and cartoons that dealt with all of them. They created web content for all of them. They created game content for all of them. And they created toys for all of them. So now, all of a sudden, where most filmmakers and directors would say, my scene is about my protagonist and my antagonist and the character, our central characters, everything else is background. Lucas never considered anybody background. He looked at all these other characters as potential stories, potential stories, potential stories that just so happened to be in the background of this scene. But I'm going to develop all of them as if they could be the heroes of their own story and then put them in the background. So now the creative mindset is different when he approaches a story. So how do we do that as independent filmmakers on my $100,000 feature? Well, all of a sudden, the roommate of your protagonist, Now that's just in the background on a few different scenes. Now you should take the time to think, how do I make that guy interesting or that girl interesting? How do I give them an interesting look or an interesting backstory? How do I make them, how could I make them the protagonist of their own story? I'm going to develop them as if they could be, and then I'll go back and put them in the background. Now, when I approach my short film, this really interesting, weird, eclectic characters now in there that could then spur a whole companion novel. Maybe it's an EP of music. Maybe it's a whole social media account where this crazy character is tweeting back and forth leading up or after the film. There's lots of different things using the principles that you see from Lucas and now applying that into your specific smaller project.